Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. Tyler Donohue and Sean Fitz welcoming you into week number 6 of the Penn State football season here in 2021. The 5-0 Nittany Lions remain at number 4 in the AP Top 25 poll. They were jumped by Iowa, went from 5 to number 3. Oregon was number 3. They tumbled after a loss to Stanford. So I don't think James Franklin, Sean, necessarily going to be upset that Penn State all of a sudden is looking up in the rankings against Iowa. They're heading to Iowa City. It's a 4:00 kickoff. And I say that because you'll take any kind of extra motivation you will in a matchup like this. And we'll get to learn a lot more about these Hawkeyes in a moment. David Eickholt from 24/7 Sports Iowa site, who does a tremendous job covering this team, will join us for an in-depth conversation. But Sean, number 4 Penn State, number 3 Iowa, the stage is set.
If you need any more motivation for this, that's a problem, because this is a really good matchup. Kind of said it after the game the other night. This is all of a sudden college football is a survivor poll, unless you're Alabama or Georgia right now. It's those two and everyone else. So everyone's just scrapping for everything that they can get, and this is a big one. I mean, I think what's going to be played up all week is this is 2 top 5 teams, but you can shoot holes in both of these schedules right now, just based on who they've played and how those teams have been good, have been bad, have been whatever they have been. And it's a really interesting matchup, because I'm not sure that we know how good both of these teams can be. I mean, I know I've gotten texts with, basically, is Penn State good? Is Iowa good? Yeah, I think they're good. It's just they're not at that next level. We're going to find out on Saturday in a tough environment at Kinnick Stadium which one is going to be the Big Ten's best shot this year, because, Ohio State, I know they rebounded and they're always going to be the on top of that mountain. But they've got a loss on that resume right now. So it's going to be a very interesting matchup. It should be two really solid teams doing what they do, and it's going to come down to the same things we talk about all the time: turnovers, big plays, things like that. And it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, and you're getting a little further away from those early victories for Iowa. That Indiana game looking less impressive. That was a team that was ranked 17th in the Hoosiers. We got a close look at them. They were not the number 17 team in the country coming in. Iowa State's lost a couple games. That was an early marquee win. And of course, Wisconsin has gone into a spiral since they faced Penn State. So, there's a lot of ways that people want to poke holes.
That's what we're going to do. That's what college football is going to do.
Of course.
You're going to take that schedule and you're going to say, oh, well, this team sucks.
Yes.
Wisconsin sucks now. Auburn sucks now, even though Auburn got an impressive come from behind win against
Auburn's
LSU.
number 18. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. You see those 2 teams at the top, and you think that those 3, 4, 5 or whatever are at that level. They're simply not. And then you just got to poke and prod and say, okay, Notre Dame lost to this team, and Indiana lost to Cincinnati by this one. It's just this whole game that we're playing to get to these college football playoff rankings. And here's the important thing: at the end of the day, one of these top 5 teams is going to lose. And Penn State hopes it's Iowa. Iowa hopes it's Penn State, and you're just going to keep trucking. Like I said, you got to do what's in front of you right now, and that's basically all you can do, because there's going to be probably a 2-loss team in the playoffs, and you got to put yourself in position just to be the 1-loss team ahead of them.
You try tracking the dominoes, you work your way down the rabbit hole, you end up looking at rankings that have Ohio State ahead of Oregon just a few weeks after Oregon went to Columbus and beat Ohio State. That's how it works this time of year. Everyone's trying to figure out how to assemble these teams. Right now, Alabama and Georgia are at the top, and then you got to go down 116 points in that poll to get to Iowa at number 3. Meanwhile, number 3 Iowa, number 5 Cincinnati, separated by 61 total points. So that shows the separation up top right now. We'll find out a lot on Saturday. As we said, David Eickholt will be joining the conversation in just a moment. But circling back to some leftovers from whenever that was, we recorded between Saturday night and Sunday morning, Sean, in our post-game podcast. I think we've got a few more things to say coming out of that. Offense, defense, and special teams. And by the way, we'll start with special teams. Jordan Stout, the second time this season, Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week honors. He shared that award this time. We talked about this. You combine him with the way this defense is playing, and his ability to completely eliminate kickoff returners and then bury teams with his punts, or shift the dynamics of your field position with his punts. And then you let these 11 guys go out on defense and carry the momentum they've been carrying. I mean, that has just been an essential part of what has worked for Penn State. And Jordan Stout, twice in a matter of 5 weeks, getting all conference praise.
You've got your special teams rankings are based on a few things, return yardage, a big one. And if you can just, cut that out entirely, you're in a pretty good spot. Jordan Stout hasn't allowed a kickoff return. He did kick the opening kickoff to the one against Indiana, which was a little bit worrisome. But he managed to come back and take care of it. I think he put his third one through the uprights, which is just a massive, massive kick. So those special teams rankings are really good for a reason. And that reason is Jordan Stout. And even the punting thing, and I tweeted this the other night, is he's putting the ball far, but he's also putting it so high that Drew Hartlob and AJ Litton are there waiting on the return man whenever they get the ball. So it's pretty incredible to see how this has come along. I'm scrolling through the special teams rankings, and Penn State's doing really well right now. Only four punt returns through 5 games and averaging just 5 yards per punt return. So that's a pretty good body of work for Mr. Stout. He's had an impressive offseason, and he's turned that and made the most of it on the field this year.
We'll continue this Jordan Stout appreciation moment here. His 93.3% touchback percentage is the highest among FBS kickers with at least 30 kickoffs on the season. He's now second all time, Sean, in 50-yard field goals at Penn State. That's something that you kind of forget about because of how well he was punting. He hit a 50-yarder that made it a 24-0 game at that point, because it didn't matter if it was 14-0 or 24-0. Indiana wasn't going to much of the comeback, but kind of put the cherry on top, made you feel really good about that lead. But the punting, man, 14 punts of 50 yards or more in his entire career. 11 of them have come in the first 5 games of this particular Penn State season. He's landed 10 punts inside the 20 through 5 games. Sean, we know how huge that was on the road at Wisconsin. He won Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week despite his issues as a place kicker. Was big again in a close game against Auburn. And this time around in a matchup, as we talked about, late Saturday, early Sunday, never felt like Michael Penix and this Hoosiers offense was going to be capable to light the fire necessary to mount a comeback. But when you got Jordan Stout continuously extinguishing that possibility with his punts, it was just a lot to overcome for Indiana.
And it's been so consistent. I mean, and I don't want to do the knock on wood game here, but no real shanks or anything like that. 48.46 yards per punt. Had that 76-yarder that did go in the end zone, but only 3 touchbacks on 24 punts. The way that he's kicking the ball is impressive in coverage, and it's impressive. It's an impressive effort by him. He's been phenomenal this year. I mean, there's just so consistent in pretty much every facet. It's still some work to do with those field goals. 6 for 9. Had the miss early in the year against Wisconsin, but can't really complain about Jordan Stout right now, can we?
Can't complain about him, and you certainly, if I hear anyone complaining about Jahan Dotson, we're going to have a conversation, because I do want to note, along with all the receiving accolades that he has warranted this year, and he continues to build his case as college football's most impressive player at that position, and perhaps the most impressive NFL prospect at that position, he's a guy to watch on special teams. I think we got a good glimpse of that with his 16-yard return in the Indiana matchup, which ended up setting up Jordan Stout's field goal. The offense didn't produce a single yard on that possession. It didn't matter because they went from midfield to field goal range very quickly, thanks to Jahan Dotson. And I really am curious to see how much more of an impact he can make in that regard. We saw as that 2017 season wore on and Saquon Barkley's national brand was built, he started to really make major plays. Of course, on the road at Ohio State as a kick returner, that was something that really became part of his arsenal, part of what you thought when you thought of Saquon Barkley, you thought of, okay, this guy's a threat on special teams. I'd love to see Jahan Dotson get some more opportunities to get loose. He had a punt return for a touchdown late in the Big Ten schedule last year. I think he's going to have opportunities, and I feel like that is a storyline here. For as great as he's been as a receiver, there are going to be moments in these next 7 games, Sean, where his abilities as a special teams returner swing momentum.
Well, he's also got a passer rating of 280.6. So he's got a little bit of everything going on for him. You're going to start. I don't think you're going to hear him too much in the Heisman race, but it's warranted. He's been that good. He's been phenomenal in every facet, and he's really a special player. And that's really what you kind of take away from that. I would like to see get a little bit of space. We saw it. We saw a little bit of it this past weekend, but continues to put in the work. Continues to put in an incredible performance week after week. And as you mentioned, that stage is going to be even brighter as a top 5 team, going through the schedule that they're going to have to go through to get where they need to be. Jahan Dotson's going to be in the spotlight for a lot of people, and I think he's lived up to it so far.
Absolutely. I do want to note here before we get into some other offensive and defensive thoughts from the last game. Our platform service that we normally will be recording video streaming for this podcast currently down as we try to record on a Monday morning. We didn't want to push this off into Tuesday or into Monday night either. So we're still recording here. We went back to our old traditional way. So if you follow this one on YouTube, you're going to see a bunch of images for this one, but we should be back up and running with video of all of our episodes after this one. Sorry about that. It's out of our hands. It's out of Lance Glynn's hands. I want to make that clear for our producer. But moving forward here, as you don't get a chance to see our mugs this time around, which is fine by us on a Monday morning, Sean, the offensive backfield has become a complicated conversation. I mean, it was already one going into the preseason. It's become even more so because of all these different factors. And let's start with Keyvon Lee, because it felt like you got to see that big playability, that some burst here, a couple of long runs, one that went for 40 plus yards. This is a ground game that has really struggled to produce runs going beyond 6, 7, 8 yards at any point this season. They have been few and far between. The explosive plays have come through the air. That changed a little bit on Saturday. 200 plus total rushing yards. It was no bell cow situation. This was one where the opportunity and the volume was shared in a distinct way. Clifford ends up with 58 yards. It's actually second on the team, but it was Keyvon Lee, 70 plus rushing yards on the game, who led the team. And I know a lot of our listeners, readers, and you and I think, very curious to see about how things can open up in this offense moving forward for Keyvon Lee. We all saw how we finished last year when the depth chart was very different. My question on him is, how much does the staff trust him? There's been some ball security stuff. How much does the staff trust him as a pass protector? How much do they trust his situational awareness? Because it was still Noah Kane coming in late in some goal line situations. Although Lee got the ball there as well, I think that's still the question I have when assessing how much of a role he takes on in Iowa City even this Saturday.
You wonder if during his true freshman season he had that great game against Michigan, as if he was blissfully naive about what to do at some point, and sometimes that helps. You don't think about it, you just go. And you've seen him think a couple times this year. Also seen him put the ball on the ground a couple times this year. What was interesting to me is Kane got the first snaps, and we'll probably talk about Kane here in a minute. But after that, they went to that 2-back set with Lovett and Devin Ford. So it even, he was the fourth running back on the field this week. And again, most decisive. I don't know if you can quantify who blocks best for which back, but Keyvon Lee seems to pick up the biggest chunks. So, you gotta figure out whether you can trust this guy to do what he can and hold onto the football. And if they can do that, they're gonna need big performances from backs this week. I mean, you're going on the road at a ridiculous environment, and I know it's not a night game at Kinnick, but still, you're going to need those guys to be at their best. And I think it's pretty obvious that Penn State's running back room hasn't been at its best so far this year. So, going to need a little bit different out of every one of those guys, but you're going to need a guy to lead the way. And so far, Lee looks like the guy that can do that with Kane playing as he is. By the way, I wanted to circle back on our last conversation. Iowa has had 11 punts returned, which is a big number. They're 27th in the country, just allowing a little bit over 3 yards per return. But it's worth noting that they've allowed 11 returns. So returnable punts are out there for Jahan Dotson if he wants to make it. So I apologize. I was trying to look up that stat real quick before we got out of that segment, but that's a very interesting number when you talk about the potential for Jahan Dotson to make a play in the third facet.
Yeah, that's a great find by you. And this is exactly the type of game where, even a 20-yard punt return could really shift things. When we think about the last time we went out to Iowa City, I don't think you were there, but Mark and I were there. It was a 17-12 game, and it just every single play felt like it held the matchup in its hands. I feel like that's the way this one's going to feel throughout. And a busting loose on a punt return could be a major break for Penn State if they have that opportunity with Jahan Dotson. Noah Kane is the name we brought up there before we get to some other running backs, so I'd love to talk about. We've got to discuss Noah Kane through 5 games. I mean, this is certainly a surprise. No Penn State running back has reached the 200-yard mark through 5 games of this season. Now, hey, they're 5-0. They're number 4 in the country. They have found a way to win these games, and Sean Clifford has done a really nice job with his receiving core and his tight end group, but it's got to be better on the ground. And that is, we've connected a lot of moving pieces there with the tight end room, with the offensive line unit, with some moving parts on the offensive line interior. We didn't see that. Bryce Effner wasn't available. It didn't seem for this past game. But speaking exclusively on running back, the spotlight's definitely on Noah Kane coming out of week 5. I think there was a noticeable difference in his athletic ability, his burst right now. It's unfortunate. And I think we're both really big fans of Noah Kane as a young man. And we think, he's a leader. We know he's a leader in that room, but right now you look at the product and he's averaging 3.2 yards per carry on 59 rush attempts. And that is far and away the most carries. I think that's 30 more than any other running back. So you look at the way that volume has been allotted among these running backs. Does that distribution still make sense? You've seen that kind of change. John Lovett taking a big chunk the last couple of weeks. Keyvon Lee last week in particular taking a bigger role. So Noah Kane taking more of a back seat. Do you think that trend continues? And I think the question is probably fair. Does Kane continue to be the guy who comes out with the first team unit? Remember, going back to Iowa, where he had a big coming out moment as a freshman and really was huge for Penn State in the fourth quarter, putting that game away late in 2019.
Yeah, you would think based on the schedule, slow starts are okay for Noah Kane, given where he came, given that he was coming off of the injury last year. Then you get to Villanova, you think, okay, he doesn't really do much in there, but it doesn't matter. It's Villanova. He's banged up. James Franklin admitted he was banged up, and then you go 42 carries for 209 yards against Indiana. And you would think a big chunk of that would be your starting running back, but it wasn't. He looked, a step slow. He looked indecisive. He looked like he was waiting for things to set up and they just weren't there. And then when they were there, he didn't really put his foot in the ground and go like we expect him to be that back. And, I think that's why Keyvon Lee was a little bit more successful against Indiana. So, I don't know what the answer is. Does not look 100%, whether that's the injury from last year, whether that's something he aggravated, re-aggravated, what have you. But you got to figure that out. This is an excellent Iowa defense. They just tore Maryland to shreds, even though Maryland kind of, put themselves in that position by handing them the ball a couple of times. But this is a fast defense that can move around and they're tough up front. So, there's not going to be much room against Iowa, and he's going to have to, or whoever's carrying that ball is going to have to be the team have to be the guy that creates that yardage. And right now, Noah Kane's not that guy.
Yeah, and we'll find out. One other note before we get to David Eickholt, who just joined us here on our Zoom recording. I do want to note here that Villanova and against Indiana the last couple of weeks, John Lovett, 25 total touches. For 99 total yards. So he's been heavily involved the last couple of weeks. And I think based on what we've seen, certainly don't think Penn State's going to sequester him to the sideline. Although I do wonder, with early action for Devin Ford this past Saturday, how does he suddenly resurface? Or was this more of an outlier game than what we can expect in Devin Ford being involved? A couple questions there.
Yeah, it's going to be one thing where you got to find your hot hand and then you got to go with it. And that's the thing. I think Franklin has said that in the past, but we haven't really seen that this year. And like you mentioned, it's Penn State's 5-0. You're splitting hairs here, but it's kind of just continuing to do the same thing while Keyvon Lee breaks a couple of big carries and you want to get him some more action, then all of a sudden he's relegated to the sidelines. That's the danger of playing 4 backs instead of 3, is that you're going to take carries away from someone. So you'd like to get going and you felt comfortable enough in the situation against Indiana where you didn't have to ride one guy. But on the flip side, at some point it's going to need to happen, and it's probably this weekend against Iowa.
We're going to circle back, talk about a little bit more coming out of the Indiana game regarding Penn State's offense, some defensive notes as well. We got some recruiting to talk about, 5-star Mailbag, but we don't want to wait any longer because he is here. It's a busy week in Iowa City getting underway. David Eickholt, who we've had a chance to have on a couple of times here on the podcast during recent seasons. This is a matchup, for whatever reason, continues to be a mainstay on both teams' schedule. They're not in the same side of the conference here in the Big Ten, but it works out that way, and it often seems to be a pretty darn big game. First top 5 matchup between 2 Big Ten teams that doesn't involve Ohio State since 1997. That's a long time, folks. David, how are things going? The number 3 Iowa Hawkeyes under your spotlight up there.
Yeah. Hey, good to be talking to you guys again. And you're exactly right. It really seems like every time these 2 teams match up, some big implications on the lineouts. I scrapped last year just because it was a weird year for everybody. I think, most outside experts, fans, everybody expected Penn State to bounce back the way they did. They have too much talent not to. But, then you go back to past years. Yeah, Penn State might have won. I think it was 5 or 6 straight. But, how many last-second thrillers, how many fourth-quarter big fourth quarter memorable performances. I mean, Saquon Barkley, maybe outside the Christian McCaffrey Rose Bowl might be the most dominant single player I've seen in a game, what he did in Kinnick Stadium that night. So, good to be talking to you guys. And, I know you mentioned the Ohio State's the first time since I think you said 1997. If you take out Michigan as well, it goes back to 1962.
That's unbelievable,
man.
Just
that's
unbelievable.
But luckily for us, Penn State, Iowa, they don't play too many boring games, so should be a good one on Saturday. What has this Iowa team brought to the table so far? Tyler and I were talking. It's kind of the same thing with Penn State. Is you're undefeated, you're where you need to be, but at the same time, everybody's trying to shoot holes in both teams' schedules to make them look like they're maybe not as good as people think they are. How good is this Iowa team? What have you seen so far?
It is kind of funny. Because I said at the beginning of the season that Iowa had the toughest opening 2-game stretch in the country because what we thought Indiana was going to be, and then traveling to Ames, Iowa to take on an Iowa State team who I still think is going to win 9 games or so. I mean, I think they have too much talent not to. But I think the reality is it's pretty obvious with Iowa. It's the offense. It's the offensive question marks. I think Iowa's special teams and defense are near the top of the country. I mean, what Iowa's secondary is doing is absolutely ridiculous. I had Cover 3 podcast host and 24/7 Sports' Bud Elliott on the other, a week ago because we were talking about the big turnover luck battle that, he's a big analytical guy and he talks about the turnover luck. And my whole thing was the turnover luck, I think, is just a symbol of being well prepared enough to take advantage of the opportunities. And I think when you look back at Phil Parker and what he's accomplished, throughout his Iowa career, it's pretty self-explanatory. 76 interceptions since the start of the 2017 season. That's the most in the country. And for the past 5 years, they have recorded more interceptions than passing touchdowns allowed. So it's a very senior riddled secondary. I think the linebacking plays improved. I think the big question marks for me heading into this season were the defensive line and the offensive line, which is very uncharacteristic of an Iowa team. But that's also why I bought stock into the team. I mean, I picked them to start out 6-0. I'm still kind of thinking about that pick now with Penn State after what Penn State's been doing. But my whole thought process is I'm going to put stock into Kirk Ferentz and George Barnett, that they know how to develop offensive linemen. I mean, in the reality too, Iowa's got a lot of talent on the offensive line, even as far as 24/7 Sports' star rankings go. So the talent's there, but can it vastly improve enough in time to be able to, take on a Penn State? And I think that's going to be the biggest question marks. But I do think it was a big symbol for Iowa on Friday, what they did against Maryland. I think they at least quieted down the crowd as far as what the offense can do. I think Spencer Petras played his best career game. I think when given a clean pocket, he showed he can make those deep throws. And I think they got the running game going a little bit. But again, Penn State's different. That secondary, I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of Joey Porter. I watched a story on Big Ten Journey the other day, a few weeks ago. Sounds like a tremendous kid. Watching his film and watching what they did against Indiana. I mean, guys, I don't want to jinx it, but 6-4, part 2.
Oh man. Well, I to your point, quarterback play, Iowa, it's crossed some check marks at this point in the season. Quarterback play here at Penn State, it's a different kind of story than when we saw these teams match up last year. That's to be certain. And I do want to ask you, you tweeted something going into that Maryland game. You said you had seen so many picks going toward the Terps, despite Iowa being considered a top 5 team, that you felt like wouldn't even qualify as an upset if Maryland won. It wasn't even a close. I mean, we saw something play out 59-0 in Maryland a couple of years ago. Yeah. What does it mean for Iowa to come home with a win that was that emphatic and that early on clear it was going to end up that way?
I think it just shows that they're able to bounce back because, I mean, look, the reality is Iowa should not have struggled with Colorado State. They should not have been down at half. I mean, Colorado State, with all due respect, the program, Iowa's just a different caliber. It shouldn't have been that close. But I think that was also such a big growing moment for that team is, hey, this is the first time, they really trailed all season. I mean, they were ahead most of the time against Iowa State. The Indiana game wasn't close. Kent State really wasn't close either. So I think the way they battled back was a really, really big deal. And I think that, I don't want to, here's the thing. Locker rooms always say they don't like listening to the outside noise. I mean, guys, you've been around the business. I mean, they're obviously going to, post up the articles in the locker room. They're going to be yelling, oh, they don't think we can do this. We can't do that. And again, I was shocked about how many people picked Maryland to beat Iowa. I thought it could have been a possibility. I picked Iowa by 2 touchdowns because the thing about Tagovailoa was if he makes an early mistake, he has not shown the ability to bounce back. And I think you saw that sort of snowball effect against that Iowa secondary. So I think it was a big deal because I think a lot of people were questioning how focused is this Iowa team going to be, because they're obviously welcoming in a Penn State who, going into last week, I think everybody was picking Penn State over Indiana just because Indiana is not what, we thought they would be this season. So I think it's a big deal, but I mean, the reality is it pales in comparison what this weekend's going to be. I mean, I've gone on the record. I think this is the biggest game since 1985 inside Kinnick Stadium when Iowa beat Michigan 12-10 when it was number 1 versus number 2. And the reality is, especially for Iowa, they have a pretty clean path to the Big Ten title, if not the college football playoff, if they beat Penn State, because Purdue's not where they're going to be unless David Bell decides to single-handedly carry them past Iowa again, which he is capable of doing. Wisconsin, I mean, they're nowhere near what they need to be right now. I mean, I got crap for this the other day, guys, but this is the first year I've seen in a while where the divisions are so lopsided. I think the East is far, far more talented than the West. I mean, we're at the point where Nebraska is probably the second best team in the Big Ten West. And after Penn State, I think the Nebraska game is going to be the toughest game on Iowa's schedule.
That is a sentence that was just said. Nebraska, the second best team in the West. That's terrifying right now. You mentioned Spencer Petras. He's coming into his own. I don't think he's the quarterback that goes out and beats you single-handedly. You mentioned the running game's phenomenal. But where's he at in his development? Where's he at on this track of being the quarterback that wins the games being the quarterback of the winning team versus the quarterback that wins you the game?
I think here's the thing. I think people, especially Iowa fans, have become so accustomed to blaming Petras that even if there's other issues on the offense, it's always going to fall back on the quarterback.
Sounds familiar.
No clue with that. Nothing. Yeah.
The reality is he's only thrown 1 interception in the past 7 games. He's a guy who doesn't make mistakes. And, all Iowa needs him to do, at least so far this season, just be able to put points on the board after Iowa gets a turnover. I think Iowa's offense has a long way to go, but I also think the yardage is still a little bit skewed just because of where Iowa's field position is at all times on the football field. I mean, they get the ball in these short yard situations and they've been able to put up points. I think they're averaging over 5 points per turnover. I mean, that's a ridiculous pace. So I think Petras has shown me a lot over the past 2 weeks. He's nowhere near going to be a guy that's going to beat you outside the pocket. If Penn State can force him outside the pocket, he has shown a trouble resetting his feet and going through his proper mechanics, resulting in some underthrows. But the reality is he's not putting the ball in danger. And I think what we saw in his first 2 career starts last year, granted it was a short year. He missed 35 days of summer and fall workout stuff because of contact tracing. That's never an easy situation for anybody to walk into. But when he's been given a clean pocket, especially this year, he's shown that deep ball touch. He completed 4 out of 6 against Colorado State when Iowa really decided to air it out. Last week, he really showed me some good things. And Brian Ferentz, I think, called one of his best games he's ever called as an offense coordinator against Maryland. I mean, everybody expects Iowa outside zone run, throw on 3rd down to open up the game. He came out and put the ball in Spencer Petras' hand and say, hey, go make decisions, go throw the ball downfield. So, it is a typical Iowa team to some degree, but I think Iowa has more skill on the perimeter than they've ever had. And I think that they're really starting to utilize that. And the reality is there's only one stat that really matters when it comes to starting quarterback guys. It's wins and losses. Petras has won 11 straight games right now. And I think that with his performance last week, I think the critics have slowly quieted down, but as far as last year to this year, the command of the offense is so much better. And I think he's playing at an all-time high confidence. Now, will that translate over after probably his best career game? That's going to be my biggest question mark going into this one, especially against a secondary as loaded as Penn State's.
I do want to talk about that 11-game win streak in just a bit because there's a 9-game win streak here, and there's a lot to discuss about how both programs got to this point on Saturday. Sure. But I don't know, David, if you are on his NIL marketing team yet, but you have been praising Tyler Goodson for a long time during his career at Iowa. Where is he right now as a running back? I know last week against Maryland, he had a big play in the passing game. It hasn't been 100-yard performances week in, week out. I know he had a huge game on the ground against Kent State, but how much of a threat must Penn State account for here in the backfield with Tyler Goodson?
I think he's shown that he's a very versatile back, and that's funny about the NIL. And the reality is he's probably one of Iowa's most talented backs they've had, at least over the past decade. I think Akram Wadley is going to be in there, but I think Tyler can do a little bit more, especially blocking than Akram Wadley could, and his ceiling's higher. But I think that he's been able to break the big runs this year. 3 of his touchdown runs have been over 35 yards. He has probably some of the quickest feet I've seen Iowa back have. I mean, it seems like every week he puts on, does a juke where it goes on Bleacher Report, it goes on all this other stuff, right? It makes its way around social media. But the biggest thing that I've seen that he's struggled with, I think, this season that really needs to improve, especially when yards are going to be hard to come by against the stout Penn State defense, he's got to just stop looking for the big play, and he's got to just get those extra 2 or 3 yards per carry. I mean, there have been times where he bounces everything the outside. He tries to shake and bake too many people, maybe gets back to the line of scrimmage, maybe gets a 1-yard gain, 2-yard game. But those 2-yard gains should have been 5 or 6. Hey, just hit the hole, take the contact, and keep moving those feet. I think that's going to be the biggest thing that I'm looking for to see him improve on. But it's also going to be a big question mark for me is what's Iowa going to do in the backup running back spot? Ivory Kelly-Martin had a huge bounce back game last week, 62 yards on only 8 carries. But this is a guy that's fumbled it 4 times this season. And he's a 5th-year senior coming off a rough couple of years. So are they really going to rely on Tyler Goodson, just solely Tyler Goodson against this Penn State defense that's incredibly physical and has done well this season? Or are they going to try to mix and match some of the younger guys along with Ivory Kelly-Martin? So again, it's tough for me to really sit here and, think about what's going to happen against that Penn State defense. Because the reality is I think Tyler can only be as good as Iowa's O-line is against that Penn State defensive line and against their linebackers. Because I think that while Goodson hasn't gotten those harder and extra yards, there have been times where a tight end misses a block. Monty Potabom, the fullback, misses a block when they go the outside. So it's little things like that have also kind of held back the Iowa running game. And if you look at the yardage from last week, I think they only averaged slightly over 3 yards a carry. It's a little bit skewed because they're, throwing in garbage time, throwing in younger backs and stuff. But I do think that he's going to go in there incredibly confident. And Tyler likes the big stage. I mean, this is a guy that really does play well on the big stage. So ain't going to get much bigger than Saturday night. So I'm very curious about what Iowa's game plan is, because I think Brian's going to try to scheme up some different things that we have not seen this season.
David, 1 to 10, how great of a fullback name is Monty Potabom?
I mean, that's got to be number 10, right? I mean, that's got to be a 10. I mean, it's like Iowa, the old Iowa linebacker, Pat Angerer. I mean, you don't get much better name than for a linebacker than Pat Angerer, right? I mean,
yeah, that's awesome. That offensive line you mentioned, work in progress. Where are they at on that progress? I mean, this is this their biggest test to date? And how do you think they can hold up against this defensive line?
I thought Maryland was a decent test, but I also look at who Maryland beat. So I think, again, those stats, you got to take into account who they beat. I mean, they beat West Virginia, but I'm a fan of, I throw out the first game for every team every year because that's just not going to be a symbol of who they are going to be, right? So, I think Maryland beat Howard. I think they beat Kent State, and they beat Illinois by a field goal. And, they were 5th in the country going into sacks. Iowa only allowed 2. But again, I don't know where this offensive line is at. And I know how weird that sounds, but they've been so inconsistent week in and week out. There have been series where you're thinking, okay, this could be the turning point for them. And then there's back-to-back sacks given up. There's back-to-back tackles for losses. And you're thinking, okay, well, what's going to happen here? But I do think a big thing for Iowa is Kyler Schott is 100% healthy for the first time this season. He was one of Pro Football Focus's highest grade offensive lineman returning heading into this season by the Big Ten in the Big Ten Conference. 5th-year senior, a little bit undersized, but incredibly physical. Pairing him alongside Tyler Linderbaum, I think, is going to really help the middle of the field. Connor Colby is a true freshman. He was a high 4-star by 24/7 Sports. He's a guy who, again, inconsistent, but that ceiling's there. And when he gets on a roll, he's proven to be pretty efficient. And I think that the biggest weaknesses right now and the most inconsistencies, though, it's from the offensive tackles. I mean, Iowa last year at the very end of the year thought they were getting Mark Kallenberger back, who would have been a 5th-year senior, started 6 games, but he elected to retire from football. And then Larrick Jackson, who is now on the Los Angeles Rams. So replacing both tackles with, a redshirt freshman who played defensive line in high school, but Iowa flipped him to an offensive tackle. And a redshirt sophomore who was a walk-on at the time, preferred walk-on, had a bunch of offers from FCS schools. Nick DeYoung, decent player again, but I think there's a limited ceiling with guys like that. So it's going to be very interesting. I think that they are getting better, but I'm also going to say I'm only grading this offensive line as good as their last series was. So if they show up like they did against Colorado State, Penn State's going to have a heyday. If they show up like they did against Maryland, I think Iowa at least gives himself a chance, because again, if Petrus has to escape the pocket, he hasn't proven to me right now that he can escape the pocket and make a high caliber throw. If he's given a clean pocket, I think at least the Iowa wide receivers will have a chance downfield.
You get this, and Sean and I understand it. Even if you're covering a 5-0 team in this industry, you got to be looking for the warts, because people want to talk about those things and what's going to hold you back, what's going to trip you up when it matters most. You mentioned the offensive line. What are also the warts through 5 weeks for this Iowa squad?
I think, again, I think it is the downfield passing. I know they've made strides the past 2 weeks, but you got to be able to be consistent about it. And Spencer Petras Spencer Petras, again, with all credit to him, he's won 11 straight games, but I'm still not convinced that they can push the ball downfield against very talented secondaries. I think last week, Maryland had the most big explosive plays allowed through the air in the Big Ten Conference. So again, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that against a roster like Penn State and the talent that they have. I think that's a big thing. I think that they've done a good job with mobile quarterbacks this year, and I think that's partially due to the emergence of Justin Jacobs, who I think is going to be a guy. He's a former All-American. I think he's, high school All-American. I think he's going to be a guy that has to make a legitimate NFL decision by the end of the year based on what he's doing. But I think Iowa's ability to mix defenses from the 4-2-5 and the 4-3, they have different guys that can do different things. But I will say this, Jahad Dotson is built to be the wide receiver that can really give Iowa fits. I mean, Jahad Dotson is one of the reasons why Iowa switched to that 4-2-5 defense a couple of years ago, because of what he did in the slot. I think Ben Neiman was still at Iowa at the time, and I think it was at Penn State, and Jahad Dotson just absolutely went off in the slot. And if you're putting Ben Neiman on Jahad Dotson, you're not winning that matchup. Dotson's too talented. He's too fast. He's too skilled. So I think that's why Iowa said, you know what, we got to put more speed on the field. And that's why they've done that 4-2-5. It's done well so far. But again, Dotson has the mold of a receiver that could give Iowa fits. And, there's a lot of good things to take away from last week's win over Maryland. Dante Demas Jr. had a very serious injury, though. And Maryland was still up in that game when that happened. So I think that's something to take into account. And I think that was early in the second quarter when he got hurt. He had 4 catches for 64 yards. Those deep crossing routes, if Iowa can't jump those, I think the deep crossing route could be Iowa's kryptonite. I really do. And they have talented safeties, but if Clifford can be composed and make the throws like he's been doing this year and avoid slipping into what he did last year, I think that's going to be my biggest key of the game, because Iowa's defense is all built off of, we're not going to make mistakes. We're going to wait for you to make a mistake. And teams have been able to make mistakes so far. So I think Clifford, if he can escape the pocket, make downfield throws and look for those deep crossing routes, I think that could be a weakness. And again, like you said, the offensive line is going to be a big question mark. Downfield passing is going to be a question mark. And, I'll even say running the football. I still think they've shown some good things this year. They've had some big runs, but the down 4 to 5 yards of carry, they just haven't been able to get this year. I mean, I think Mekhi Sargent is probably one of the more missed Iowa players from last year. He was never an explosive guy, but he got you those 5-6 yards of carry. So for as many good things as there are about Iowa right now, I still think there are some question marks to, taking them to that next level. Because I don't know if you guys agree with me on this. I think Alabama and Georgia are clear 1 and 2 right now. Like,
we just talked about this.
Everybody else is below that.
Yep.
Yeah, David was not on our intro when we said the exact same thing. So just a little behind the curtain there. David, looking at as we transition from offense to defense here, looking at both sides of the ball, who's the one guy that Penn State has to account for? Who's the one guy that's going to keep popping up that Penn State fans are going to be like, not that guy again? Because it's not always the best player. It's the guy that, finds that seam or does something, as closely as we cover these teams on 24/7 Sports, there's always that guy. So who's the guy that Penn State needs to account for on every play on offense and similarly on defense?
Yeah, I think for defense has to be Jack Campbell, Iowa's middle linebacker. He had an 18 tackle performance 2 weeks ago. He's been the heart and soul of Iowa's defense this season. 43 tackles on the year, 6'5", 240 pounds, probably one of the fastest sideline to sideline linebackers I've seen, especially at that size. Because you don't see a lot of, Mike linebackers that are 6'5", 245, but he can move. So I think he's a guy who has a nose for the ball. He can make big things happen. I'm also going to throw in Justin Jacobs again, just as maybe another guy, because what he's done this year, going from barely playing to forcing fumbles to making big plays happen. He could be a guy that, he's going to cover a Theo Johnson, who I think Iowa fans are still a little bit upset about losing. I know they were in on that. And on offense, I'll say Sam Laporta, because Iowa's tight ends, I think Iowa's really starting to get some production out of their tight ends. They've had a rough couple of years from the production standpoint from them. Sam Laporta has done some good things there, but when you replace TJ Hawkins and Noah Fant, it's an impossible situation to go into. But Sam Laporta has been a big target on third down. He's Iowa's leading receiver on the year. Iowa loves doing those play action bootlegs, then hitting Sam Laporta, having a second tight end, Luke Lachey, go out as a front blocker. I mean, that got them 4 first downs alone last week against Maryland. So I anticipate they're going to try to run something similar there. And another guy who I think is due for a huge game that hasn't had one this year, who I think is incredibly talented, I think Tyrone Tracy Jr., he's probably one of Iowa's more dynamic receivers. Hasn't really had that production he has a redshirt freshman, but as far as strength, speed, and everything, he's going to be a guy that I think Iowa's going to try to really get involved in the offense this upcoming week.
When we were out in Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days in late July, you and I were exchanging notes a little bit about how last year started versus how last year finished. It took Penn State a while longer to get going. We saw Iowa in Beaver Stadium. They actually handed Penn State its 5th straight loss. And then since then, Penn State hasn't lost again, and Iowa hasn't lost again either. How is the program got here? Because when we spoke in 2019, Penn State went out there, beat Iowa. It was second straight Big Ten loss. They had just lost to Michigan, I think 10-3. And you were very seriously talking about there are questions about whether Kirk Ferentz has peaked and then some, and if it's time to look for new leadership. Here he is. I don't know, what is it, year 50 for him with the Hawkeyes, and they're number 3 in the country. How did it get here?
You know, I really think it all stems back to what Iowa went through last year with the racial disparity allegations in 2020. I think that the culture has changed from all accounts, from what I've heard from the players, what I've heard behind the scenes. I think players, Iowa players weren't allowed to use Twitter until last year, when everything really started opening up. So they started using that. The players have a voice. They have a leadership council. They get the young guys involved in the leadership council. They've done all these different things behind the scenes. And these guys are just genuinely love playing with one another, and they have a genuine deep bond. And I think I said this at the time too, and I think it really sticks more at home with me and Iowa fans now because of this. So I said going into that Michigan State game last year, it was fresh off the back-to-back losses. I said, this is the most important game of Kirk Ferentz's college, Iowa career, because if they start out 0-3, I think everything goes completely off the rails, especially after everything that, the team went through from a national standpoint going into that. They came out and absolutely boat raced Michigan State. And I think once that burden was kind of lifted off the team, they remembered what that feeling was like. I think that combined with, I'll say this too. I've asked players about this. COVID brought teams closer together because they were so isolated from, the rest of society at that time. And I think that's really played a big part in it as well. They had nothing to do but focus on football, watch film, and, Netflix and nap. I don't know what else those guys are really allowed to do. So I think from the top down leadership wise, I think that there's been a big change as far as just a culture of the program goes. And I think that stemmed over the football field. I don't think it can be overstated about the better players get along off the field, it is going to translate on the field. And I've seen times this year where a guy will make a big play. Yeah, he's excited about it. His teammates are more excited about it in the moment and after the game than the player himself is. And I do think that has translated in a big way. And, I think you have to give the coaching staff a lot of credit too, because when that whole thing went down, they only lost the commitment of one kid at the time, and he ended up going a different route, a different level of football. So I really do think Kirk Ferentz, not that he was downward trending and whatever. I think before last year, he had the most wins in a 5-year span in Iowa history, which was 47. But, I don't want to say he was lacking. There was lacking a fire there, but everything is just ramped up, I think, from the top down. I think he got rejuvenated. I told you guys this, I think off the record too, that before this whole thing happened, I thought he would retire by the end of next year before that whole thing went down. I think Kirk's going to stay for another 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years now. I think he's really trying to, quote unquote, repair his legacy. Iowa fans don't think he has a legacy to repair, but there's still that national standpoint based on everything that happened. He's recruiting at a better rate, which, look, they say it doesn't translate over to wins, but guys, the stats don't lie. So I think from all accounts, I think it's just been the big shift in the culture change and the players embracing it. And I do think that that's translated over the field, because also 10 of their 11 wins have been by double digits. The only team that's been in single digits within them is the Nebraska game when Iowa won 26-20.
Reiterating just how long Kirk Ferentz has been the head coach at Iowa and how rare this matchup is. He's been the head coach for the Hawkeyes since 1999, and during that entire tenure, there has never been a top 5 matchup in the Big Ten without Ohio State. Once again. So this is a huge game for a guy who's been the head coach since 1999 to say this is one of the bigger games of his career speaks volumes. Yeah. Sounds like a couple programs that have been galvanized by what they went through in 2020, certainly different circumstances, but it's early in the week. We both have a lot to learn about this matchup, and I'm not expecting you to come on our podcast to pick against Iowa, but where's your head at on this matchup, and how does Iowa make sure it stays unbeaten, and how does Iowa end up coming off the tracks and sending Penn State back with a win? Penn State, by the way, 3 straight wins in Kinnick Stadium.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I've gone back and forth on this. I picked Iowa in the preseason. I thought Penn State would be good. I didn't think they'd be unbeaten at this point, but I mean, I thought maybe they would have dropped 1. But I think the biggest thing that Iowa needs to do is, I know Penn State's running game hasn't been there this year. Noah Kane, by the way, I'm not sure what's Noah Kane's status for he's not 100% right now, correct?
He doesn't look it, but he's out there. He's involved. Yeah, he started each game, and he was out there in the fourth quarter last week. So he's part of the plan. He's part of the plan, that's for sure.
He's a guy that I really think is, not a lot of people agree with me on this. I think he's a guy that really could give Iowa a lot of fits. I think a couple of years ago, their last win inside Kinnick Stadium, Noah Kane picked up those crucial first downs late in the game. I think it's because Iowa's defense was so physically worn out, and Noah Kane's he's not an easy guy to tackle. So I think, if he can really get going, I think that'll be a big thing. I know Penn State's doing the running back by committee sort of thing. I think Iowa, what they need to do is make Penn State a one-dimensional offense. If they can keep Clifford in the pocket and force him to make decisions based on what Iowa's doing right now, I'm picking Iowa secondary to win that matchup because they've been so meticulous about their film study. They've taken advantage of the opportunities. And, again, I think mobile quarterbacks have hurt Iowa in the past, which is why I'm very interested to see what Iowa's defense is going to scheme up, because do you keep a quarterback spy or do you throw another guy to keep eyes on Jahad Dotson, who, again, I think could absolutely go insane against this Iowa defense? And I don't say that lightly because I don't think a lot of receivers are capable of doing that. So I think that's going to be the biggest key for Iowa. And I think on the flip side, for Penn State, I think it's just, to win the battle of the trenches. I think you can't give Spencer Petras a clean pocket. I think that if Penn State can physically own the time of possession, if they can physically wear down Iowa, and if Noah Kane can really get going, again, I really think Noah Kane could be the X factor for Penn State in this game. I love the way he runs the football. He's tough. He's physical. And not this Iowa team won't quit, but he's just a different caliber of back. When you traditionally look at the backs who have given Iowa trouble, Noah Kane does fit that mold. I don't care what his stats say for heading into this game. He could be a guy to watch for sure. So Iowa keeping the pocket clean, Penn State wearing them down, and we'll see. And like I said, I know you're not going to make me pick. I don't know who's going to win this game. I really don't. I think it has the potential to be the Big Ten game of the year, without a doubt.
It's going to be fun, man. It's going to be fun. I'm sorry I won't be joining you, but I got to stay close to the hospital around here.
Pathetic excuse. Unbelievable. Choosing family over Penn State football. Come on.
Yeah.
It's just your firstborn. How many of those can there be?
Don't let me serve that as a lesson. And by the way, David, congratulations on the contract extension with CBS and with 24/7 Sports. Really happy to be a colleague here in the years moving forward with you.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's it's good to be working alongside you guys. You guys do a tremendous job, and we'll keep this thing rolling.
We'll talk to you soon. I'm sure throughout game week, we're going back and forth a little bit about our respective squads. So take care, man.
Hey, take care, guys. Thank you.
David Eickholt does a great job covering Iowa for 24/7 Sports, and that's going to continue into Saturday. Like you said, just hearing it from his vantage point, it feels like a bit of an echo from some of the things we're talking about a 5-0 team inside the top 5 with a lot to gain on Saturday. And I'm with him. There's some really exciting ways you can break down this matchup, whether it's Clifford against this Iowa secondary or Penn State trying to get these one-on-one matchups on the perimeter and force Petras into some situations that he hasn't faced this year. It's Monday, but I'm pretty revved up for this game coming up Saturday afternoon.
You should be. And that was a tremendous, I don't know if anybody skipped ahead or anything, but go back and listen to David Eickholt. He was fantastic. You mentioned, you brought up a good point that you got 2 5-0 teams, 2 top 5 teams, and we're out here looking for the warts. And there's certainly, this is not an unblemished side on either side. So I'm looking forward to how this one plays out. It could go a number of ways. I don't see it going 48-46, but it could go
No.
a number of ways, and it can be a very entertaining football game on Saturday.
We've got some things to get back to here in Happy Valley as we get ready for another week of player availabilities and some practice access a little bit later here. Right now, we're still building off of what we saw on Saturday night in Beaver Stadium. We talked about the running backs. There was 4 of them involved. I wanted to point out one particular play that I thought was really indicative of overall how the night went and how Penn State after that early interception was able to avoid any kind of pitfalls offensively that gave Indiana some kind of fresh jolt of energy. They didn't give Indiana anything that made them feel like momentum was switching. 4th and 7 completion from Sean Clifford when this team was driving down for their first touchdown. 9 yards near the sidelines. Excellent catch from Parker Washington, but I thought on the fringe of field goal range, Jordan Stout probably has the leg, but you don't want to give up the ball in a 0-0 game to Michael Penix in midfield and maybe give them that jolt that I just said. I thought that completion and then later capping it off the drive with a touchdown pass to Brenton Strange showed a lot of confidence in between Sean Clifford and his receivers, but also Mike Yursich and Sean Clifford.
2 for 3 on 4th down conversions, which Penn State has had a habit of getting into a spot where they get that 4th and 5 or whatever it have. And you're not talking about the one at the goal line. That was the one that they didn't get, which they should have gotten. The running backs are responsible for that. But that's one where you've seen the game change. You know, you think back to that Maryland game last year and Penn State's driving and all of a sudden they've got a 4th and mid or something like that. And you know, you don't complete the pass or whatever. You get that, you keep that rolling, you move the sticks, you keep your defense off the field. So many good things happen when you can, not only have the gusto to go for it and then you actually get it. Great throw by Sean Clifford. Those are momentum drivers that, you probably forget about in the post-game show type thing. And then you look back and think how big of a play that was for him to be able to make that pass, for Washington to make that catch. Really put your offense in a situation where you have a lot more confidence going week after week.
When we talked about momentum building with Sean Clifford going into the season, a lot of it was negative momentum building and things sliding the wrong direction. This year, it's been different. It's been building towards something positive, and it's been a consistent theme here through 5 games. A big test coming up against Iowa, but this was a game against Indiana in which they really were able to dominate that time of possession. That's not really something that's been characteristic for Penn State. 31 minutes plays, 76 plays to 57 plays. I thought that was big because they were able to keep the pressure on Indiana's defense, get off the field. And as much as you can keep these guys rested from a defensive standpoint, I'm particularly thinking about that defensive front, although as we'll get to in just a second, there were some nice signs of depth there. I thought that was big, the ball control here. And David just said if Penn State can play some form of ball control offense, that's going to be a big ticket for them to come home with a win on Saturday.
Yeah, and on the flip side, Indiana 3 of 14 on that's tough on 3rd downs, and then they got 1 of 2 on 4th downs, but still, that's what's going to dictate the game. That's what's going to keep your your offense confident. That's what's going to keep your defense off the field. That's I don't want to say that's all that happened, but you mentioned the play disparity, the time of possession disparity, about 35 minutes to about 25 minutes. That's big time, especially when you're playing with a shorter roster on the road. So Penn State's going to need to continue that sort of thing. Clifford, as much as we hate to say it, this is the first, when you think about Iowa away, that's the first time we saw Clifford, that deer in the headlights look that has kind of become synonymous with him over the last 2 years. I'm sure we'll talk about that more, but it's going to be about how he handles it. Obviously a little bit more mature, obviously confident right now. So we'll see pretty quickly in the game on Saturday, which, how big those strides have been.
But what feels different about this matchup than that matchup is, in that case, they leaned on the ground game to come home with the win. It feels like the way this Penn State team has performed, based on the 5-game sample size, they're going to need to lean on Sean Clifford to go out and make plays late in this game. That's how things have evolved in a couple of years. Obviously, that's what you'd want from a third-year starting quarterback versus a guy who's just getting started, but much different setup here, although the stakes are very high once again. And I wanted to make note here, hasn't been a bunch of stats built up by Theo Johnson, but he's maximized those opportunities. 4 straight catches, and maybe a bit quietly because of everything Jahan Dotson's doing and the fireworks they had against Villanova, but 4 straight games with 20-plus yard reception. And it just seems like he is wide open. They are dialing it up with him. They're picking their spots, and Clifford seems to find him in stride with a lot of room to work with. And let me remind our listeners, 6'6", nearing 260 pounds, 4.51 40-yard dash, or 4.54 it may be. Either way, the fastest tight end 40-yard dash that they have on that big board, which goes back to 2012.
Yeah, he can play a little bit. And these tight ends are going to be huge this week. Be something I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more. But these tight ends are going to be absolutely massive against that Iowa front seven. All the talk is about the secondary and all those turnovers forced, but they have something going for them up front, which is what every Iowa team has. So it will be a situation where you not only need them to make the blocks, but get them out and move the chains. And as we mentioned, and improve that third down ability, the third down conversion ability. So, but Theo Johnson just gives you something, and Brenton Strange is really good too. The tight ends, I think, have lived up, maybe not the biggest numbers in the receiving game, but I think they've lived up to, you can see the talent coming out of those guys a little bit more than you can see from the running backs right now.
I still think the moving forward, blocking from that group more consistently, making sure you clamp down and don't whiff or release too early. I think it's been a bit of an issue during short yardage situations, really across the board, and picking up guys on switches, on stunts. Been a problem. That's an area where you tie that into the run game conversation. You got to pick it up on 3rd and 3. You got to turn 2nd and 9 into 2nd and 4. It just hasn't been consistent. This feels like a game where that will certainly come back to haunt you if you can't move the ball on the ground in short yardage situations. I want to go over to defense here, and James Franklin did a nice job setting the tone for us by posting a picture of him enjoying a Zero candy bar on Twitter on Sunday afternoon, and gave a nice shout out to Brent Pry in the process.
Yeah, he's a big nerd, by the way. But the Zero candy bar, the first shutout in 246 games. And Indiana's been bad at times during that stretch, very bad in times in that stretch. But still, that's a remarkable stat. Opponents have not scored on 7 of 15 red zone trips. Not only
ridiculous.
It's not like 7 of 15 and you get some field goals. It's 7 of 15 haven't scored. That's unbelievable. So they've clamped down. They've made those plays, blocked a couple field goals, forced a couple turnovers. So, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And that defense is going to have to be on point this weekend. And, I think Petrus, as well as he's playing, can be, susceptible to the turnovers. All those quarterbacks that, maybe lack the physical, the God's gift physical things that we look across college football. Some of these guys have it. Some of these guys don't. Petrus is a really good quarterback and a really good leader, but nobody's going to mistake him for a guy that's going to go number 1 overall or anything like that. So Penn State has an opportunity to make those plays and have your defense sort of set the tone. And I think Iowa's defense is going to try and do the same thing and do a really good, and they obviously do a really good job at it, but set the tone and be not outside of that red zone, be the team that really dictates things.
Say it one more time. No points for the opponent on 7 of 15 trips inside the 20. And there have been big moments late in Auburn, late in Wisconsin. That says a lot about, we know this is a defense full of athletes. We've seen them swarm to the ball, but it says a lot about the way the trust and accountability is in place, that no one is, it takes one thing. It's a domino effect. There haven't been lapses. And if that can continue in this stage on Saturday, that says a lot about where this defense is, because when it has been ugly for this defense of late in recent years, there have been guys looking around at each other after plays, trying to figure out what went wrong. We haven't seen that. And that's been huge for this defense. And Sean, one thing that I thought was interesting from David was the perimeter of the offensive line may be a problem in this matchup for Iowa. It's at least unproven in his eyes going into this game. And I think we saw Arnold Ebiketie prove that he can win some key one-on-one matchups. I talked about going into the game against Indiana. Could him and Jesse Luketa off the edge dial up some pressure on their own without assistance from the blitz? And there was certainly occasion where the blitz contributed toward pressure, but I thought Ebiketie in particular, he got a sack, he got a couple pressures. Luketa forced a couple errant throws from Penix. That is the kind of performance that if those guys can duplicate against what sounds like a very vulnerable set of offensive tackles there for Iowa, that could be the difference maker. Because the one thing I don't know about Petrus is, can he improvise? And how well can he do it? And how many times can he do it? Because we're starting to see Sean Clifford prove that he's a pretty good improviser, not necessarily of a Trace McSorley level, because McSorley was on a different level in that regard. But if you can have your quarterback turn a collapsing pocket into a 7-yard gain, whether it's through the air or whether you pop one deep and you find a guy because the defense is closing in, That's a huge advantage, and I just don't know if Iowa has that in their quarterback right now.
That's one thing David Eickholt kept saying was you keep Sean Clifford in the pocket, and you think about where all the things that Sean Clifford's been through, and then you look at this year when he's been able to, I don't want to put this on him, but play like Trace and get outside the pocket and keep his eyes downfield and then hit that delayed throw. You know, we looked a couple times last week at Sean Clifford, how close he was to the line of scrimmage when he let that go. That Brenton Strange touchdown was one of those. He's been able to keep his eyes up and go and not just put his head down and try to get the first down that way. So that's an interesting dynamic that you add to this game that you probably go back a month and think that you really wouldn't have to do that. He's been able to be escapable. He's been able to keep his eyes downfield and do some really nice things.
And he's been able to avoid big hits in the open field to this point as well. I think that's been important. He's been done a nice job of working to the sideline, living to fight another play when he does get out and about. He will take his shots. There's no doubt about it. He's a physical runner, but I think he's done a pretty nice job protecting himself while also putting Penn State in good spots as a runner. A few other guys that I thought really coming along on defense, Brandon Smith coming off that Auburn game. He was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. I know some surprises there. I think he continues to make himself known earlier in the game. I think it's not taking as long over the course of a game for him to kind of feel like he's catching up and then all of a sudden he's in rhythm. I feel like early on now, Brandon Smith is locked in. I'm not saying that focus has been an issue. I just feel like he is a factor from snap one to the last snap on defense, and he's being left out there on a lot of snaps right now, Sean. This guy's, we talked about defensive line playing a lot of snaps. Brandon Smith's been counted on a lot by Brent Pry. And then another guy I wanted to mention here, Daquan Hardy, got the starting nod. They went with a nickel package to open this game, and I thought throughout the game, and he was tested late, broke up a touchdown pass, kept that shutout preserved. Daquan Hardy, there was a lot of questions when people heard in preseason, really, Daquan Hardy's coming along. He's going to be a huge factor in this secondary, in this cornerback group. We're seeing why he belongs out there.
Yeah, those guys have made some big pushes in there. You expect Brandon Smith, but Daquan Hardy's been a guy that I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but he's had a really productive year. And with his size, with his background in terms of being a last minute ad, not a lot of people would, really give him a chance. And he's done a great job with that. Maybe could say the same about Jair Brown. We thought that Penn State needed him to be solid for them to be in the position that they are to get to where they are now. I think he's been a little bit better than solid. So those guys need to continue doing what they're doing, and Penn State will be just fine. You also add guys like Devon Ellis in, who's played a bunch of snaps, is that basically pseudo third defensive tackle, even in passing situations, which we thought he was a run stuffer. We thought he was a one technique, but he's been very valuable for them, playing a lot of snaps to give Derek Tangelo and PJ Mustipher a blow from time to time.
Ellies has been crucial. Just absolutely crucial with Beeman out of the equation. And what else you have at defensive tackle? I don't think anybody else in that group is going to give you what he has brought to the field. And I think some of the other guys are still maybe a year off from that point in their career. Here in year three, you're seeing him, be called upon as the lone interior guy on a 3-man front. And he's effectively getting some penetration there in the pocket against Indiana. Now, I think we'll continue to see a lot of him. And I think it's not just a necessity because of what you have at defensive tackle, but it's a necessity because of who you have starting in PJ Mustipher and Derek Tangelo. I don't think either of these guys are around next year. I know Tangelo is not. He's a senior. The way PJ Mustipher's playing, I don't necessarily see bonus NCAA eligibility being something that's super appealing to him. So you need to find out who can be some bedrock defensive tackles for you moving forward. Devon Ellis through 5 games, starting to build that case. And boy did defensive coordinator Brent Pry and defensive line coach John Scott need somebody like this to step up at that spot.
Yeah, you're always going to need numbers there. You're always going to need depth there, and Ellis has been certainly a pleasant surprise along the lines of what Hardy's been in the secondary.
Moving forward to recruiting, because as we mentioned, coming off of the game on Saturday night, a third straight Saturday with a commitment. This the 26th overall for the 2022 recruiting class is that came Saturday early on. Omari Evans, just a few hours before kickoff, the speedy wide receiver from Texas. Covered this a bit on the post-game podcast, Sean. There's a lot more happening in recruiting, though, beyond that commitment. Some stories are up. Bunch of 2023 visitors, a bunch of photos up of those guys on campus spending time with Franklin. Long story short, a very successful 4-game stretch for Penn State back in Beaver Stadium, able to do things they haven't been able to do in 2 years.
Yeah, they've. It's just they're making the most of their opportunities right now, as you said. You get 4 straight home games. You expect a lull at some point, but still, I mean, even the Villanova game had a decent list of guys on hand. This weekend, bunch of the names that maybe didn't get up for the whiteout, even some that did get up for the whiteout, but guys that wanted to get up for the whiteout, like Samaj Bridgman, Marcus Dixon from Archbishop Wood. They were up. Christian Garrett, which this is a ridiculous story. St. Francis played in California on Friday night, and he was at the game at Penn State on Saturday night. That's unbelievable.
I think he wanted to be there. I think he wanted to be there.
I can't even imagine, man. I just flew in from Chicago, and I'm exhausted, still exhausted. Not really. But no, you got things going like that. Cam Lenhart came back, his second visit in 3 weeks. The one that got me, and this was not expected. I don't think Penn State staff even expected him there. Tamir Robinson, the linebacker from Pittsburgh, he was up with anytime that you could get Tamir Robinson on campus, you're gonna love that, especially with Lamont Payne, who's already committed to Penn State. This is one where you like where Penn State stands right now, but they got to keep up with Ohio State, Notre Dame are heavy in there as well. So just keep getting him back to campus, and probably not the last time he'll be back. I'm sure he's looking at that Michigan game as a return trip as well. But they've hit on these big visit weekends, and even when it's a small visit weekend, heck, you saw Michael Van Buren, the quarterback from St. Francis, came out of nowhere. He was actually at Penn State last weekend for the Villanova game. Penn State just offered him this morning. So even when they're not trying to hit, they're hitting on these things, and it's been really fun to see it come together. Phil Paciotti from Penrich, and by the way, I absolutely was butchering that name. Thank you, all of Bucks County, for letting me know that. But he was back, and I have a crystal ball pick in for him. You just watch the body language, you watch some of the conversations. He came up to get a little bit more time with the coaching staff, more than you would get with the whiteout, and there's a lot that points to Penn State in that direction. So Penn State, with just, I believe, 3 commitments in the 2023 class, I expect that number to grow, and because they have momentum right now.
Speaking of momentum, quick note, Drew Aller got to play in front of a national television audience his last game going into the weekend, Friday night. 300-plus passing yards, 4 touchdowns through the air, added a 5th score as a runner. His team is all unbeaten. He has been phenomenal. That's been fun to follow. And just a reminder that him and Bo Prabula are going to be on this campus in a matter of 3 months. So just it's you're going to see an infusion here in the quarterback room that is going to be extremely fun to follow. And based on the way both those guys are playing, and 2 guys who do it very differently, it's going to be fascinating to follow. We got to keep focused on Sean Clifford, because what he's doing this year, there's guys behind him at quarterback right now who don't want to feel like they're going to be moved to the side come January. But man, Drew Aller has answered the bell in a big way, and Mike Yursich, James Franklin got to feel great every morning when they look at that commit list and see the quarterback out of Ohio securely on board.
Look, they thought he was a really good player when they took him. I don't think they even expected this out of him. He's been incredible. Just you look at that and you expect a potential 5-star quarterback to dominate, and he's gone out there and done that and then some. So they love what they had in Drew, but I think I'd be lying if I said they weren't a little bit tickled, surprised about how well he's done this year.
Let's get into our 5-star mailbag. It's a question that we wanted to get to last Thursday, didn't quite have time, but we're going to circle back to it now. And it comes regarding dining experiences on campus. Todd Blackledge was looking for a State College restaurant for his Taste of the Town segment last weekend for the broadcast of Penn State, Indiana. Where would Sean and Tyler send Todd if they had to pick a local joint? Well, first off, he knows a lot more about campus than I ever would as a former quarterback around here. I've only been around for a few years, but Sean, I'll let you go first, because I feel like you have such a better depth of experience in eating at the best and the worst of what this campus, I'm sure, has to offer.
Well, first off, he ended up in Williamsport, which is an hour away. So
yes.
That was an interesting choice by him. I have a feeling, doesn't he usually do the Tavern? The Tavern just got redone. I haven't been there yet, but have heard some good things about the remodeling and things like that. But I'm not, I love food. We love doing good food, but State College, I don't think it's any secret, doesn't have it's not New York City when you're talking about cuisine around here. I'm an Otto's guy. I take the family there all the time, but that's kind of out of not necessity. We just love the atmosphere, and it's loud there, and my kids are loud. So you'll have that. But I'm not sure where I'd send Blackledge, man. The Field is probably one. You take a look at those burgers, and there's certainly quality there. I'm a big fan of Tadashi, the sushi place. I know I don't really look like a sushi guy, but my wife got me into that a couple of years ago, and I like sushi. I like Cozy Thai as well for Thai food. Gigi's is out my way, so we often go there. It's a bayou, a New Orleans type place, low country food, things like that. Which
you're trying to make a lot of friends right now.
I would love, I'm trying to go down my sponsorship pitches here. There's a bunch of them, great food. We mentioned Champs before, but anyway, it's really, it's a good town for good food. I don't think you're looking for a 5-star restaurant here, but it's living here. I don't have, exceedingly limited options. That's obviously not what we'd love to have 5-star restaurants everywhere, but there's some good food to be found in State College.
Little mix of criticism in there. It was a really strong answer from a guy who's been around here a long time. And I will say, I will go back to endorsement deals. We'll for a small price on a weekly basis, we'll tell you your restaurant's the best too. There's no doubt about it here in the
Lions. We can be bought. Podcast. There's no doubt about
that. Oh yeah. We are certainly available to the highest bidder. But I'll give one without that kind of promotion. AK, Arnold Ebikadi, I hope he was getting paid for his tweet. He tweeted about those nachos at Happy Valley Brewing. That is a legit dish. If you're just on campus for a weekend, those nachos, oh man, those are ridiculous. But for me, newer spot, Central Reservation, right there downtown, right in the heart of downtown. The reason I go there is because they've got a grouper Reuben sandwich, and I've never encountered one of those beyond the Gulf Coast of Florida, and I always hammer them in the Gulf Coast of Florida. Grouper Reubens are my go-to. Central Reservation, downtown State College, they got a damn good one, and it keeps me going back. So that would be, kind of one that I think is probably off the radar for most people.
I love a good grouper Reuben as well, so I like that choice by you.
Check that out. All right. Well, I think now that that's been solved, we'll get back to business on Penn State and Iowa in our upcoming episodes. We got a matchup coming here Saturday at 4:00. So it'll be a much earlier post-game podcast whenever that game goes final. But on behalf of Sean and our producer, Lance Glenn, I want to thank David Eickholt and enjoy his coverage of Iowa all week as we try to keep tabs on what the Hawkeyes are bringing to the field on Saturday. On behalf of all those guys, I'm Tyler Donohue. Thanks for listening, as always, to the Lions 24/7 podcast.